Ayo, what's outside is within. The mind regulates the hand that masters the pen. The pen is mightier than the sword, but the tongue is mightier still. The stargate to the mind's revealed. The Vortex. Okay, peace. Cyclonius, the host. And again we have Kevin, Real Talk with Kevin. This topic for today is dealing with systemic racism, from classroom to courtroom. I'd like to label it as. So the first section, Kevin, is understanding systemic and institutional racism. My first question for you is, what is the difference between systemic racism and institutional racism, and why is that distinction important?
Yeah, I think with institutional, I'll begin with, if you go across the board when it comes to the criminal justice system, education, healthcare, you'll see a disparity at the top end of most of those institutions in regards to the demographic that's leading. So the level of underrepresentation has been identified in art, TV, down to football, in education at the top end. The majority of practitioners at the top end are predominantly white. Even if you're in a certain location that might be more urban, you'll still see really a lack of representation of a certain demographic. The filtering down, because everything's top down, of the culture will come from the top. So how, say we say education, how the culture is may not fall in line or be as beneficial for those that exist in there, for the students that are mainly black, because there's no relational sort of cohesion, because when it comes to culture and understanding what's best for those children, there's a lack of understanding. So the culture itself is not set in a way where it wholly benefits the majority in that building. The staff, the treatment of staff, you'll see a disparity in the treatment of staff in the building. I've seen it on numerous occasions. And part of that's because of some bias, more implicit bias than anything else, because, you know, I'll talk about unconscious bias in a particular manner, but with unconscious bias, you can make excuses. People can make excuses and hide behind the veil of a conscious bias, even though they have got conscious racist tendencies. But the institutions themselves, with the lack of representation, shows already the nature of that institution. When George, it's funny because when George Floyd died, and there was this push for more representation at the top, it became sort of tokenistic, non-transformative, a non-transformative situation that was transactional as well. So there was a push to have more black people at the top, so you might get one black person at the top, but they filled that quota. It didn't make much change. They pushed for having different types of training, unconscious bias, code switching, microaggressions, and they done this thing, and it felt to a certain extent as a tick box exercise, because really what has happened now is that after the thrust of that as an agenda, after the fact now, it's sort of laid dormant and nothing's really changed. So that's part of institutional, the sort of the dynamics of institutions. But systemic racism is about the systems that are in play, that you don't need people that are racist in there for it to operate. So I'll give you one example in regards to the skills-based criteria for black people getting into the country after Windrush. So, you know, Britain called out to the Commonwealth, the Caribbean countries, to fill that labour deficit after the Second World War, fill jobs in areas like the national health and the bus and trains, etc. Now, there was a time, I think it was under Macmillan, where this skills-based criteria sort of, the parts of it were directed at black people not to come in the country. So you didn't need anyone to operate the system. The system operated in a biased way anyway. So if you didn't match the criteria, which many black people didn't coming from the Caribbean, you weren't getting into the country anymore. So a lot of systemic racism is about the systems that are put in place that, when they're operational, have a detrimental impact on a certain demographic, and them accessing certain areas, or even not accessing, but being denied the right to either come in the country or operate in a certain way. So,
how does racism get built into systems like education or healthcare without individuals needing to be overtly racist?
I think the healthcare system itself, when it comes to healthcare, and there's, you can go in, it's fine, you can go into the hospital, you can go into the doctor's surgery, and you can get care. I think some systems can't always operate, its infrastructure doesn't always operate in a manner that is racist, but those individuals within there, there's disparities in treatment. So in healthcare, people will know that with black women, there's a difference in treatment compared to white women, especially in regards to this preconceived notion of black women's pain threshold. So they don't need pain meds, So already there's black women that are suffering in that area. There's study showing that, especially I always make references to certain books. Keon West's The Science of Racism has showed numerous studies of how in the healthcare system black patients are treated differently, and some really to the detriment of their lives end up dying in the healthcare system. In the school system as well, you can enter into the school system, that's not a problem. Any child can go to any school, depending on where you're living in a certain location and distance from a school. But once you enter those doors, the people in there themselves, you can, if you're in an environment long enough, you can tell how different the treatment is in the school. You have to put some schools under the microscope, so to speak, because unless you're in there, you'll think it's operating with a great deal of fairness. However, when you're in education, and especially when you talk to educators, especially at a senior level, you'll get an understanding of the mistreatment they've been suffering at different points in time, and what they've had to put up with, whether it's being in, a senior leader being around the table, and I've heard of senior leaders being recorded, there's a different level of disdain towards senior leaders where staff are oppositional in regards to following instructions. You'll see young black boys and black girls being given sanctions that are really absurd, so to speak, where they might get a 5-day exclusion for throwing a piece of paper, while Tom, Melissa, and whoever else may do something worse and get a 1-day exclusion or get sent home. You may get a child getting shouted at in a certain way, a black child, when there's some behavioural issue, or they get sent to an inclusion room. While that might not happen to another child. Staff disparities happen. So one member of staff asks for something that's black or Asian and they don't get it, and then white staff might ask for something and get it. So when you're inside the institutions themselves and you see it operating, firsthand. If you're aware, you can start seeing, and I'm not saying that's every institution, because there are schools and leaders that are very mindful of what's going on in the school, the culture, and what benefits the whole. But across the board, if you look at statistics and read certain books and look at certain literature, there's a definite disparity in the treatment of certain people. And really, to a certain extent, there was a push and the proverbial muzzle was taken off black people's mouths and they were able to speak up after George Floyd. But the muzzle's been put back on. And now it seems like black people have gone back to that place where they're under the stone, just there dormant, not being able to talk about certain things anymore. So.
What does the term taxonomy of racism mean, and how can it help us understand the different layers of racial injustice?
You know, for those people that understand the word taxonomy, so if you've got a structure that identifies something and puts it on the sort of scale, so I think one of the earliest people to do that in some way is the Portuguese chronicler Gomes do Zurara. So it was more, you know, Africans were a certain way and they operated a certain way. That wasn't the real taxonomy from him. That came later with Carl Linnaeus and Johann Blumenbach, where white Europeans resided at the top and as superior, and black people resided at the bottom. I mean, the same sort of thing came about with Sir Francis Galton and eugenics in a certain way, just this look of, you know, sort of black people being inferior compared to white people. So the creation of that and the push of a certain narrative throughout the world, through these, you know, pseudo-scientific thinkers, because really a lot of the stuff that they were producing was nonsensical and non-scientific, to say the least. But it pushed a racist narrative. And for the world, if there are academics that are highly regarded and you push out a certain narrative globally, people are going to be susceptible to thinking what you're saying is true. So if you push out that narrative in different areas, and psychologists like Eysenck, who's quite racist, the people I've mentioned already, if in children's books they've got a certain narrative, if you've got a white family from back in the day reading a book about Noddy and the gollywogs are robbing Noddy, what does that create in the mind of a young child in regards to this sort of stereotype of black people? They're a certain way. So whether it was children's books, advertisements, I mean, adverts are everywhere. So if you've got a Pears soap advert that's got a black child in the bath and then washes with Pears soap, the body, and when they stand up, all of it's white, like, oh, we've cleaned you off. The old school American adverts with the mammy and the, you know, the accentuated lips and the accentuated eyes. There was the shoe polish, the colour on the shoe polish was nigger brown. There's a lot of different ways that they pushed a certain narrative through different mediums globally that made people see black people in a certain way, and it hasn't changed. But what it did do was it infused the minds of people on the ground to see black people in a particular negative way. You know, so it was an agenda, it feels like, that has sort of snowballed over the years and continued to infiltrate the minds of people on the ground.
Why is it often difficult for people to accept that systems, not just people, can be racist?
I live in Britain. I was born in Britain. Do I feel British? I think when I come off holiday and I feel like I've come home, I feel that I'm British. And you know, I was brought up on the Great British Breakfast, you know, and a Sunday dinner. Even though my mum was Trinidadian, you know, I'd eat roti and curry or whatever. There's a Britishness to me. I speak in a certain way. I can put on a Cockney accent if I want, you know. So, but will I defend Britain wholly because of my experiences, the racist experiences? I don't know, but for white people, you know, they can live. It was so profound when this lady had said what white privilege was is not having to deal with the consequences of racism. Dealing with the consequences of racism makes you be defended in your mind about what's going on around you. If you're white in Britain, you feel okay, you walk around with the privilege of not having to deal with the consequences of racism, and anything said against your country or systems that you think operate well is a problem. You talk to someone and you say to them, you imply that they're racist, even if they've said something to you that's racist, they'll defend it. No one wants to be seen as being racist. And some people are so ignorant that they don't even know when they're being racist. So the systems themselves, I mean, people in Britain and across whatever country that are patriotic, they don't want anything to be criticised in their country. You know, so to think that, especially when you've got a situation where loads of different types of people are in England, and the pre-existing people that have been here from how long and had generations of families, they think you're taking the mickey. You come into this country, you're getting housing, blah, blah, blah. How can you criticise our criminal justice system and say it's racist? How can you criticise the healthcare system where you're getting free healthcare and saying there's racism there? So I think it's quite hard to not be a defender of what you see to be beneficial to not only yourself but also people that are coming into the country. You know, I talked about Britain and not being able, I don't know about defending it. Of course, you know, half patriotic. You know, I see Britain as a place that's easy to live in. You've got chances to be successful, and compared to other places where black people exist, we're not, you know, I've got no fears that really, I know I can get pulled over by the police and there's a disparity in that, and I have done when I was younger, but I've got no fears of being killed by the police really, not in the streets. So I know Britain is a place that if you're living anywhere as a black person, it's pretty calm. You know, and anyone that does reading in regards to racism and black history, you've got awareness about you, but you've also got an awareness that Britain's a place for black people that's not as bad as, say, Australia or America, you know, and certain other countries. So I do hold Britain in high esteem in regards to a place to live. Especially living in London and it being cosmopolitan, and you've got exposure to a lot of different cultures, but at the same time there's an understanding of how systemic racism operates and how institutional racism operates, and how it has an impact on your life, and it can be on a day-to-day basis depending on where you're working. You know.
Can systems change if the people within them don't acknowledge the problem?
They can't. There's got to be some acknowledgement, you know, and I think sometimes people are stuck. If a system's operating in a particular way, why change it? If, you know, I think it's black people make up about 4% of the population. Why change a system for 4% of the population? Doesn't make sense. How are you going to change it? It's going to take a lot of intellectual minds to try and establish some sense of equality through systemic means. I think it's easier, and we've gone past equality, to establish a sense of equity where you get what's needed to help you up the ladder. That'll be easier to achieve, but like I said, it's about the masses really, and whether you're black, Asian or whatever else, we're in the minority, you know. So I think it'll take some great influential thinkers to sit down and say, all right, this is not working. The statistics show that there's a disparity in that area, and that area, and that area. What can we do about it? And also, I think black people have also got to take responsibility for generating their own wealth and creating their own systems in some sort of way. You see other communities building up their businesses and their communities operate in a certain way, and I know that through trauma, etc., we've been fragmented, but there are black people that are professionals, that are creative thinkers, that are intellectuals, and if there was some synergy and a sort of, like there's a collective consciousness in regards to racism and atrocities and dehumanization and all the bad things, there should be a collective consciousness in regards to pushing forward together, and trusting each other and being able to build our own wealth and our own systems. I think in America, that's a place, as much as there is a lot of racism, etc., black people over there are able to pull it together in certain places, whether it's Atlanta or wherever, to create their own. You know? I don't think it's, I don't know what it is with black people over here, why we can't seem to operate in a way where we get together and do something. And more so in South, I think it happens more in South London. There's a different way that black people in South London operate. You know, when I go to Brixton or wherever, and you're in the sort of hub of the black experience, there's a different feel you get up there. There's grassroots organisations that are operating in a certain way. In North London, you really don't feel that. You don't really see it.
What was the educationally subnormal school system, and how did it impact generations of black children in the UK?
You know, it's funny because, was it Small Axe by Steve McQueen, the black director? He made a series of short, about, I think it's 4 episodes, and one of them was about ESN schools. And I think it was that sort of put me on the trail of looking into that a bit more. Now, we got a situation now where, for me, it's sort of replicated, because even though in certain boroughs they've used managed moves to lower exclusion rates, but exclusion rates, apart from Roma Gypsies that are probably the highest out of the lot, but the lowest percentage of people as well, is black boys as the highest level, had the highest level of exclusion rate, highest exclusion rate levels. Now, then you would see a lot of black children go to Prues. Some of them might not be the worst, and some of them have got excluded over very minor things, like one and done, you're in the Prue, and then you end up in a situation in a Prue environment, especially nowadays. 10 years ago it was different, where there's more children with special needs in the Prue. So you're getting some young people that have got bad behaviour. You might have some that have special needs and they've been ousted and ended up in a Prue, but you've got some with bad behaviour but they really shouldn't be in a Prue. There's some work that could have been done earlier to avoid that. But now you're getting a copious amount of children I'm talking about the ones without special needs, are entering special need type places, because that's what proves are sort of becoming. But the ESN schools were special needs schools, and if you're from a generation of family that came from Windrush and had a different language and different understanding, so you know whether you're talking patois, and you might call a tap something else, yeah, you might call something else something else. You haven't got the same vocabulary as British people. Now, when you're talking, and you're talking in patois, and you haven't got the understanding of the British language in the same way, and there's differences in regards to little things, some of those children, even though, if anyone knows about the education in the West Indies or the Caribbean, that is a very high level, that some of these children, a lot of these children shouldn't have gone to a special needs school, or educationally subnormal school. But because of the language barrier, a lot of these children, because whoever was making the decisions based on the children's intellectual levels or their vocabulary, they sent them to these educationally subnormal schools. Now, if someone needs to watch Small Axe, you need to watch that and see what happened to this boy that was sent to this school. If you've got other special needs, proper special kids running around creating mayhem, what happens to you when you're in this hostile, turbulent environment? You know, you start adopting certain behaviours. You know, they're very tense. So the ESN schools, for me, there's a parallel going on now, it feels like, with children being sent to pupil referral units, where there's a significant amount of special needs children.
Yeah.
And some of the children that have been sent to the PRUs, you know, I've seen the disparity in that. I've seen children that aren't black do a lot and not get sent to a PRU, and I've seen black children do one or two things and get sent to the PRU, and then I've seen a special needs black child that shouldn't even enter a PRU, and you know they've got special needs, and you still permanently exclude them and send them to a PRU environment where they can't function, or they're vulnerable enough to start adhering to the nonsense that's going on, and their behaviour goes downhill and gets significantly worse.
There's a lot to take in. Quite deep. How does systemic racism show up in modern classrooms today?
I think it's more institutional than systemic. Because education system itself, I don't know, apart from the people that run the school, from the governors to the head teacher downwards, yeah, and to the classroom teachers, those are the components that operate in a racist or biased way. So I think in the classrooms, there is a different level of teaching. There's research studies out there. Please go and buy that book by Keon West, because in reading that book, I mean, Pager, as one of the researchers, one of the main researchers that's been doing research over time.
So what's the name of the book?
The Science of Racism by Keon West.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a non-emotive book. So there's a lot of people that might think about, and you know, we've had criticisms on the post about the stuff that we've been talking about. People getting upset about what we're talking about in regards to these topics, and getting angry about what we've been saying. I'm going off the topic a bit, but I'll come back to it. But it's been pretty upsetting that we haven't been talking in a way that's wholly militant. We haven't been talking in a way that's saying that all white people are evil and racist. You know, I've said before that I'm a humanist, and I know you are. You mix with all different people with no problems and don't judge people. The judgment comes more on how you treat me, you know, than anything else. But it has been upsetting to think that when you're talking about feelings, inequality, injustice, that people still want to say, oh, but your parents weren't slaves and you're so far detached, oh, that's not a trauma, this, that and the next, blah, blah, blah. And still this lack of understanding or the inability to even put yourself in someone's shoes and say, all right then, what have these people experienced? What is going on? In the school system, if I'm talking to you about the different type of treatment and disparity across the board in regards to the treatment of children, I might talk about this right here, right now, and then there'll be criticisms about it. But you're not hearing what I'm saying. You're listening to it, but you're not really hearing what I'm saying, you know. And in school, like I've said earlier, and I could give numerous examples from the treatment of SLT members, the treatment of staff below that, the treatment of parents, and the treatment of children. So if there's, and I'll start in the classroom, and Keon West identifies loads, and I mentioned Pager because it's a researcher that comes up a lot, that's done a lot of research. There is a disparity when you read in that book, and I said it's a non-emotive book. So what I was trying to get to is that a lot of people that hear things about the black experience and the negative parts about it and want to defend against it think that it's just based on our emotions. It's not both based on just our emotions and what we're feeling. That's only part of it. There's actual data that demonstrates how black people are being treated. And that's why it's important for some people to read that book, because it's not, like I said, based on me feeling upset about something or you feeling upset about it. There's tons of research that's been done to identify how black people have been treated and the difference in how white people are treated. One thing, so there's a study about they done in regards to CVs and putting out CVs, identical CVs, and the only thing that's been changed has been the names. So they've got a black name and a predominantly stereotypical white name. They've done a study with upstanding black people, upstanding white people, and black people with a criminal record, and white people with a criminal record. Now, when they done this study about who they'd employ, the white person with the criminal record got more of a chance than the black person without a criminal record. That's how deep it is. So you could be white with a criminal record and still get through in a job and have an opportunity more so than a black person that's upstanding and got qualifications. You know, so please have a look at that book out there. Let me go back to what I was saying. So in the classroom now, there's studies in that book where lessons that are taught to black children and how they're taught are poorer than the lessons that are taught to white children. Yeah, that's research. Yeah, you can be in a classroom though, and you can observe a teacher talking to different children in different ways. I've been in meetings, in classrooms, and I felt the difference in treatment. I've been in a meeting where a really dysfunctional white child has been mollycoddled and looked after in the meeting, and a really nice black child that's got no behaviour issues, just got problems with organisation, has been vilified in the meeting in front of their parent. Now, if I'm in a meeting and I've got no voice because I'm outside in the meeting, I have to just stay there and observe it, you know, but it has an impact on me. Now there's many times, whether it's in meetings or whether it's in the classroom, and the shouting at that child or the sending out of that child, or a sanction that leads to a suspension or a permanent suspension, I've seen it. Whether there's meetings with parents and how parent or care has been talked to in the meeting with their child is completely different. And the outcomes are completely different.
Yeah.
For staff, I said that asks for things. There's a different level of treatment. There's a different level of sanction. You might get a white member of staff that does something that requires them to be sanctioned in some way. And suddenly it seems like it's swept under the carpet. And then afterwards, with the black member of staff or the Asian member of staff, it could be the Turkish member of staff even, and the Cypriot member of staff, you'll see them get treated differently and get a sanction. And maybe on the formal capabilities plan or whatever. You know, you'll see it in senior leadership, where the white members of the senior leadership may have more of a group dynamic, and they're in an in-group, and that member of staff that is black, Asian or whatever is in their own out-group. You know, and it's observable. You can see it happening. And it takes a real serious leader that has got compassion and empathy for people of different ethnicities to say, all right, I understand there's a disparity in society and in institutions. And I'm the person that's going to fly the flag for changing that. Now, I'd love to see an educator or educators that are picking up the mantle and moving forward in that way. And in that way, you're going to get, you know, a culture in schools that's more positive than anything else. You know, without the backlash of young black and other ethnic groups going into school and having problems adhering to the curriculum because they're already in their back foot, unconsciously in their mind, because remember, trauma's deep with black people, which is another thing that people that responded to us were upset about, because they don't understand that trauma's passed down over time. Because I've also, as an educator and observing things that have gone on in education, had to talk to my children about navigating that social space. There's many black parents that talk to their children about navigating school, especially if they're clued up, you know. So, you know, we do need some really innovative leaders out there that are willing to push the boat out in regards to making a change. And I know they're out there, and sometimes their hands can be tied by powers above, and that's upsetting. And even at a governmental level, the Board of Governors, like, come on now, pull it together, especially in certain areas where there's predominantly a lot of ethnic minorities populating the schools.
Do you think the curriculum itself is a tool of institutional bias? If so, how?
Institutional bias, I understand, working in education for a long time, that curriculum is sort of the curriculum that supports the next stage of your life. Yeah, in the country that we live in. So, English, science and maths, basic, main subjects that you learn, that you have to do. But I think the bias comes in one main area, and I've talked about the decolonisation of the curriculum. I think the bias is still apparent in regards to the holes that haven't been filled in history. I think that it's so beneficial for for black, white and all ethnicities to understand the history of black people, and that is a history of multiculturalism more than anything else, because black people didn't operate in isolation throughout time. There was interactions with the Romans, the Greeks, the Persians, Turkish, everyone. You know, ancient civilizations. We all were bartering and trading.
That's right.
And warring. You know, so, but the black part of it has been excluded from history. You know, one of the maddest things that ever happened to me when I was in uni at a late age was that I was talking to a young lady when I was doing criminology and psychology. She was doing, I think, criminology and history as a joint degree. And I said to her, you know, what about the transatlantic slave trade? You know, this is a university level. They don't touch on it. For it being such a predominant part and a major player in Great Britain becoming great and the wealth that they amassed, how is the transatlantic slave trade not even mentioned at university level? How does that happen?
I was going to say to you, what do you think about that? Because in my mind, I'm thinking maybe it puts a magnifying lens on that situation, on the so-called great. Or, you know, the coming of the Britannia and all of this stuff, and the Commonwealth and all of that, and all of the other people that was involved. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think it will put a big magnifying lens on that, and I don't think they want that to be looked at and digested.
And there's a few things. I mean, it is funny because even when I bought I can't remember the title because I'm getting old now, of the book by Simon Webb, who's a right-wing extremist of sorts. And when you start reading the book about the white slave trade and the Berber pirates that were coming to England and taking white people and slave trading them in North Africa, I think about 1.5 million slaves, white slaves. And unless you know the history, you don't know the history. So why do a lot of white people not know that history? Why do a lot of people in general not know about white slavery, you know, and early white slavery? What does knowing about your people being enslaved do to you? What happens to your mind and your self-esteem, your self-worth and self-identity if you know that you've come from slavery? But a certain section of society don't know about their slave past. You know, so you have to think carefully about how things have been orchestrated.
Yes.
And have a psychological impact on the minds of a certain group of people. Yeah, so, you know, there's a lot that can be done, and I think in regards to the curriculum, there has to be changes now just for all students. They're children, they're the future of the world. The school system doesn't operate at its best because you're not tapping in to children's real skills. I'm a child, I love art, I've got an interest in psychology and sociology. I hate science. I can do maths and English. I like making things with my hands. Why not tailor the curriculum so that I do the subjects that I like and I can tap into and maximise my efforts rather than have me in a lesson that I'm disengaged in part of the curriculum? It doesn't make sense. You're getting loads of students nowadays, especially now in today's youth culture where there's so many different things affecting them, where they're becoming demotivated. Motivate them. Let them do the lessons they enjoy and that they can tap into to a certain extent, where they go from year 7 to year 11 fully engaged in those subjects because they love them.
Yeah.
Now, they're not tailoring the system for children like that. And I mean, there's there's so many intellectual educators at a top end. I'm sure they can sit down and think of a plan of how we can make education better across the board for all children. Because whether it's white British boys that are failing, you know, people overlook, and we can have these talks all day about the black experience. But like I said before, me and you are humanistic type of guys, so you know that white boys are failing in schools. So what are you going to do about it? I've got concerns for black children because my children are black, but white people have got concerns for their white children. Tailor the curriculum so it benefits these children and they don't become these school non-attenders or disengagers or walking out of lessons. Right? So, you know, there's a lot going on in the school system at the moment that needs an overhaul, to say the least. But for me, the worst part of it in regards to for it not fitting well for black children is you've got a platform that is so important in regards to the building of self-worth and self-identity. Education does that. Secondary school systems, all right, you've got primary school, but secondary school system is the foundation of children starting to understand themselves, you know, emotionally. So put some black history in there, you know, pack out human history, you know, it shouldn't be hard.
How might the labelling of children like challenging behaviour or low ability, how does that play into hidden forms of racism?
You know, if you've got a narrative that's been spun for decades, for hundreds of years, people have already got an unconscious preconceived notion of a certain set of society. So sometimes without even any guidance, you know, there's psychodynamic theory. They got things going on in people's heads. Freud made a topographical model of the mind and a structural model of the mind. So the structural model of the mind is the conscious, subconscious, unconscious, and the topographical model. I might even get this right today. It's very early. The id, the ego, and the superego. Yeah. So the id is the wild sort of child rolling around instinctively, and then you got the superego there. That's sort of like your mum and dad's teachings in your head, and your ego's the mediating force between both.
Right.
Yeah. Now, what could be potentially passed down unconsciously into the child, into their superego through the teachings of their parent, is that black people are inferior. Because it's an unconscious process, you wouldn't even know that you're doing it.
Yeah.
But your child has picked up on the signs and signals through your teaching that you feel a certain way about certain people. Yeah. Same thing in a black household. Oh, don't trust those white people. Like that's overtly going on.
Yeah.
But it might be implied in a different way. Yeah. But it's lodged in your superego. Now that child grows up to be a teacher. Unconsciously, you can't help but reprimand that black child or that child from another ethnicity in a certain way, in a negative way, because if you go back generations, people have already been primed to see black people as inferior. So and then they've passed it down into their children that have become adults, that have their own children, and they pass it down into their children, and they go into work, and they discriminate, or there's prejudice, or there's racism. There's deeper levels to what's going on psychologically that people don't understand in regards to the passing down of information throughout generation and how that impacts on that individual and how they treat other individuals. I might talk about this now, and people and people get upset about it because no one wants to see themselves as being prejudiced or racist. You know, I read about something the other day, aversive racism, and I was like, right, I've never even heard of that racism. Same thing in Keon West's book. Now this is like, imagine you're a left-wing white person, yeah, that I hate the word woke, but I'll use it in this capacity. That's woke. Please don't ever say that to me. I hate it. And stands up for certain people. Now, they done a study, and when there's ambiguity, and it's sort of related to that white person with a criminal record and black person without a criminal record. When there's ambiguity in regards to information, that woke left-wing person will suddenly do something because it can't be seen the racism. Yeah, they'll lead into a racist sort of judgment.
Right.
Yeah, but I never knew about aversive racism on the. I've never even heard of it.
Yeah, it's news to me.
Yeah, so the hidden forms of racism are passed down throughout generations, and as those adults grow up into workers, it's done unconsciously or consciously, implicitly. I'm trying to get away from the unconscious bias because I have more of an understanding now that unconscious bias is also used as a tool of deception.
Okay.
Yeah? So I can say to you, oh God, I don't know why I've done that. I think it's unconscious bias. But I know I'm a racist.
Yeah.
So I'm hiding behind the veil of unconscious bias.
Yeah, the term is hiding behind it.
And then what are you going to say afterwards?
Not much.
Not much.
Yeah.
You're not going to say much because, all right, it's an unconscious process. But it's not. Because I've just hidden myself, but I know I don't like you, or, you know, I'll treat you a certain way. So I've gone with implicit more because of that fact, because of that level of deception.
Okay.
Hey yo, what's outside is within. The mind regulates the hand that masters the pen. The pen is mightier than the sword, but the tongue is mightier still. The stargate to the mind's revealed. The vortex.